Hello. Next for the British empiricists, we have John Locke. Now, John Locke um, lived or was born during the period of the English Civil War between Parliament and the King, Charles I. And, well, Charles I lost. And Cromwell and Parliament executed the king, right? Beheaded Charles I. So the zeitgeist of the time, they say, is a very political time period. All right, and a time period when Parliament, well, exercised its ultimate authority over the king by executing him after a civil war. Now, the monarchy would be brought back later, but this, kind of cemented a lot of the authority of Parliament, right, in Britain. So anyway, they say that because a lot of these, we mentioned with Hobbes, his, view of politics, and Locke later, when they finished talking about him, of course, he was on the side of democracy, and it was really Locke's writings on government and democracy that influenced the founding fathers of this country, incorporated a lot of John Locke's political philosophy into our Constitution, and you can see the spirit of it in the Declaration of Independence. And Locke also actually was influential and wrote or influential in writing the Carolina colonies charter as well when it was still part of the British Empire. So he was very influential politically, John Locke, for development of democracy. And so anyway, they talk about the fact that he, went to Oxford and all that sort of stuff. Eventually got his medical degree too. And later in his life, he really started his writing and became well known later on in his life. But they do talk about John Locke really being perhaps the British empiricist that had more of an influence on subsequent British empiricists, more so than Hobbes did anyway. So they do have some things that Locke did not address, and they mention it in there. Of course, he's an empiricist, John Locke, British empiricist, so he believes that incoming sensory stimulation is key for the creation of ideas. Now, how do sensory experiences create ideas? Locke was content just saying that the sensory stimulation creates ideas. He didn't have to go further than that for Locke. So he didn't try to address that philosophically. And of course, a lot of these British empiricists now are, coming up with their approaches in opposition to some of the ideas that Descartes had proposed. So Descartes, of course, had proposed the existence of innate ideas, right? Such a just a belief in God would be an innate idea to Descartes. And of course, Locke disagreed with the idea of these innate ideas, principle of which was a belief in God. And so that set Locke, in some controversy with the church, right? Because the church, that's a great innate idea right there. Belief in God is innate. And Locke says, oh, that's absurd. And so he gets attacked by the church. So, of course, throughout this whole period, you have that, right? Of some conflict between the church and religion and some of these ideas these people are saying. But of course, John Locke was a man of religion, though. He was not an atheist or anything. And once again, he, was familiar with Newton's philosophy and exchanged letters with Newton, and they were both very religious men. So they weren't setting out to create problems, let's say that anyway. So everything comes from experience, though. So our ideas are created by our sensory experiences, and an idea was just a mental image, right? And basically all the ideas come from sensory experience, but also from reflection. All right. So ultimately, all ideas are created by sensory experience, but then through reflection, through the mind reflecting and thinking on these ideas after they've been created by sensory experience, right? So once an idea is created by a sensory experience, that idea continues to exist. And we can reflect on those ideas and, clump them together and create complex ideas, right? So a simple idea is just an idea that cannot be broken down any further. A complex idea is a combination of simple ideas. So a complex idea is something that could be broken down into more basic ideas. So reflection is a source of ideas too, not just sensory stimulation, although ultimately all ideas came from sensory stimulation, but we can create new complex ideas through reflection, see? So anyway, there you got that. Now they give some attention to, generally speaking, empiricists are thought to have thought of the mind as being more passive than the rationalists in the next chapter thought of the mind as being more active. Generally speaking, but they say that's not exactly correct with Locke. All right, Locke was against the notion of innate ideas, but they say in here that he did believe that there are certain abilities of the mind there, right? So when we form complex ideas, something has to be there from the get-go to enable us to do that. So they say that Locke really thought that some stuff was happening in the mind, right? That basically there are some innate operations of the mind, right? Not ideas, but innate ways the mind works, which must be, it seems to me. So basically, yeah, and they just make that point in there, right? The mind can neither create nor destroy ideas, but the mind can arrange or rearrange existing ideas, right? Into ad infinitum, right? Forever, right? And they talk about emotions, and so, yeah, Locke believes that the two basic emotions are pleasure and pain. And basically all ideas, whether they're simple or complex, are going to have an associated feeling with those ideas. So from the basic feelings of pleasure and pain, we get the more emotions. But basically he believed that we are kind of hedonistic, right? Same thing we said with Hobbes, although I think Locke here is, doesn't think of human beings as being as selfish and evil as Hobbes. Maybe not evil, but anyway. So now we get to primary and secondary qualities for Locke. All right. So other people had used primary and secondary qualities to refer to objective truth and subjective truth, sort of, I guess is the way it was, like with Galileo. But here, qualities are ideas for Locke. Okay, so primary qualities, that's an idea that objectively matches truth as it is there in the object in the world. All right? So a primary quality is an idea that is a correct manifestation and a correct correlate to what the object is really like. All right? So some things create primary qualities. Secondary qualities, though, are going to be ideas, subjective ideas that do not accurately reflect the object out there in the real world. All right? So qualities are ideas. Primary ideas or primary qualities are objectively accurate of the object. Secondary qualities are not objectively accurate of the object. This is just an idea in me, a subjective idea in me that does not match the actual physical object itself. All right? And this is true when it comes to our senses. It's really true. Color vision. What I perceive as being a color it's not an objective quality of the object out there. That object is not red. It's literally not red. That does not belong to that object. All right? It's light waves reflected off that object, particular frequencies of light waves that are reflected off that object and into my eye are interpreted by my brain as being red. But my perception is, so it's a secondary quality. That object itself objectively is not the color red. And that's true. And they mention some other secondary qualities, basically, like temperature as well would be an example of a secondary quality, and they use his example or paradox of the basins. So you should read that, basically. If I'll let you read that, all right? But it demonstrates how the same temperature water can feel warm to one hand and cold to the other hand. So it's the same water, yet one hand experiences it as warm and the other hand experiences it as cold. That is, demonstrates that temperature must be a subjective secondary quality, an idea that I have that does not accurately reflect the object itself, right? So that's that. And then you got associationism. They talk about that, and associationism was a big deal to a lot of empiricists and sensationalists. The ideas, that occur close in time, become connected together, that kind of general idea. But Locke has a different twist on it. He really thought that ideas that get connected to each other just through contiguity is basically coincidence. And he said that this leads to faulty beliefs, right? So this really leads to something that's not true, right? So, what would be a good example of this? I don't know. Maybe I walk into a room and people are laughing. So I incorrectly believe that people are laughing at me. Well, that's faulty. That's a faulty belief. They're not laughing at me. Those two things just happen to be, contiguous, happen close in time. So it led me to engage in a faulty belief, which is not true, right? So he thought that contiguity of this kind of simple associationism would really lead to faulty ideas. Good ideas are really resulting from the reflection in our mind, the logical, rational type stuff. So associationism to Locke was, just by chance leading to faulty beliefs. It wasn't really organizing our experiences in a rational way. And lastly, of course, they mentioned his view on education. Locke was very influential in education. They talk about him believing that children should get educated both at home and at school. So both environments should be geared to educate children. And he thought it was important to harden children, or the process was called hardening, right? You didn't want to, you wanted to raise children in such a way as to be prepared for the normal stresses of life. So you don't want to baby children. Right? So you don't want them to sleep on soft mattresses all the time. You want the children to sleep on the floor though. Sleep on the floor. That'll harden you. That kind of stuff. So expose them, to some stressful experiences. Not extreme. You're not making the kid, I guess, sleep out in the mud pile, but you're letting them have some experience that's going to help expose them to some stress and help harden them some for the hardships later in life. Thought you could use mild physical punishment on children in the classroom. He was very careful to say it should be mild. It should not be too bad. You did want to try to make the educational experience a pleasant one, so that children would seek it out, and so that they would seek higher ed or further education. because you don't want to make that educational experience, yeah, unpleasant. Otherwise, they won't want to be educated anymore. So he had a lot of advice that people followed for a long time, and some of this advice is still around. Now, a very important thing about his education, though, okay, he's saying, and of course, John Locke, I haven't said it before, but he's famous for saying the mind is like a tabula rasa. In Latin, the tabula rasa, the mind is like a blank slate or a blank piece of paper, and experience writes knowledge on our mind, right? So he really insists that nurture and experience are what are much more important than nature or innate ability. So nurture and experience are really important. If we give the right experience to any child, they will be educated. They will get smarter, right? So he's saying here, hey, anybody can be educated. Maybe everybody should be educated, right? So Locke's view on education really influenced utilitarianism, which we're kind of skipping later through this chapter because we're jumping around. But utilitarians, these were the people who first popularized the notion, of education for all, right? Since we all have equal potential at birth, we should educate everybody, right? I mean, this was not an idea before. Why the hell, in time before this, why the hell would you educate, the dirt poor? Why would you educate the peasant? They can't learn anything anyway, right? No, they can't, right? We all have equal potential, right? If we nurture them correctly, they can be educated, right? So there's kind of equal potential in all human beings, right? So you're starting getting some of these, ideas that influence politics and universal education later on down the line. So there's a lot of neat ideas coming out at this time period, in my opinion. But that is John Locke.